Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Peter O. Estevez Show. This is your host, Peter O. Estevez. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Today, I have with me none other than Rocky Garza. Rocky Garza is a keynote speaker, culture consultant, a self-proclaimed challenger, truth teller, and change maker. Let me go into Rocky's bio a little bit because I want you to get to know him because we're going to dive deep into some of the workshops that he does and has a lot to do with who he is and where he comes from. So Rocky firsthand had a difficult. Rocky knows firsthand how difficult it can be to identify what makes you unique on your own. We get caught up in insecurities and fears, and we tend to spend too much time looking outside and compare ourselves to what others project and say about us. And boy, do we do that today, especially with social media, especially with all the distractions out there in the world. Rocky's childhood tells a tale of having moved 10 times, having to make new friends at every new school. He ended up spending more time trying to impress or please everyone else, going from one extreme of the pendulum by sailing along on charisma to the other end by living on a life of self-sacrifice. No matter how hard he worked, nothing seemed to make sense, and he was never able to see his real value or worth. That is until he took a step back and had a long, hard look at who he was and not what he did. After graduating with a communications degree from Texas A&M University, Rocky spent 15 years walking alongside thousands of individuals at Sky Ranch Summer Camp as a director and counsel, and supported hundreds while on the pastoral staff at Chase Oak Church. Now, as a keynote speaker and a culture consultant, he has taken thousands through the identify mapping process. As a result, they have all been led to understand the most vivid picture of who they are and how they operate best as individuals. Hello, Rocky Garza, and welcome to the Peter O. Estevez Show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Peter. Hello, everybody out there, and thanks so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Rocky, I said a mouthful in that introduction, and I'm going to start right at the beginning. Tell us about your childhood. Who is Rocky Garza?
Yeah, so I was born in Kansas, but I don't really claim Kansas. I only lived there for about a week. So after Kansas, I moved back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Texas has always been my home, but Dallas-Fort Worth has always kind of been the mainstay. It's where my grandparents were at, and at multiple points in my life, it was always the place I came back to. It was kind of my safe place, my refuge was my grandparents' house in Dallas. More specifically, Carrollton Farmers Branch, for any of you familiar with the DFW area. So I moved back here. My parents got divorced when I was 2, and I lived with my mom and or subsequent husbands over the course of my life growing up, or my grandparents. So after my parents got divorced, I never lived with my dad. My dad got remarried when I was 7. He's still married, has 2 boys, so I have 2 half brothers, but never really grew up with that family over the course of my childhood. So would see him on holidays and such, but kind of lived 2 separate lives that way. Lived up in Louisville for kindergarten. After kindergarten, I moved back to Farmers Branch to finish kindergarten. I moved to San Antonio for 1st and 2nd grade. I moved to the other side of San Antonio for half of 3rd grade. I moved back to Farmers Branch to finish 3rd grade. I moved to Carrollton for 4th grade, Farmers Branch for 5th grade, Frisco for 6th grade, and then back to my grandparents' house in 7th grade. So I say all that. I want to make sure that all our listeners out there, it's not a sad story. It is just my story. It was just a part of how my life was growing up. And to be honest with you, as I look back, I didn't really know any different until really I got into adulthood and recognized that my life didn't look as similar as so many other people's lives looked. And so I think as I look back at that portion of my life, I definitely, as you alluded to a little bit there in the bio, I learned early on, if I could outthink you and outtalk you and outwit you and out charisma you, I could find a way to create really transactional relationships. Obviously, I didn't have that language when I was 12, but I found a way to create those kind of relationships that allowed me to now, as an adult, stay safe. I was always attempting to be on a journey to keep myself from being hurt or from being left, if we really want to get into the real words, to make sure that I wasn't going to be abandoned any longer by things or people that I loved or cared about. And so really all through my life, elementary school, junior high, high school, growing up, it was kind of that consistent journey. I was kind of friends with everybody, but simultaneously deeply friends with no one. I found myself in a position where put me in a room with nobody I'd ever met. It was kind of my most favorite place because I got to start all over, brand new every time. You get me to put down roots, want me to stick someplace. I didn't buy my first house until I got married with my wife back in 2011. And it was the scariest thing I'd ever done, because buying a house means you couldn't just leave if you didn't like something. And I had spent a large portion of my life just leaving if I didn't like it. And so I think really looking back at my childhood, for the most part, I had everything that I needed. Most of the time I had everything that I wanted because I lived with my grandparents and they were awesome from a material standpoint. And don't get me wrong, I had lots and lots of people in my life that loved me. But I think it wasn't until really I got more into adulthood, really got to a place to where I married my wife, and we started really looking at our lives and going, what were the pieces that were missing, where I had worked really hard for so long to try to maintain a level of survivorship, if you will. I wasn't actually ever thriving. I wasn't ever actually fully living. I was always kind of on the precipice of trying to do my best to keep myself safe and survive. And so I would say, really the last 15 years or so has been kind of a journey of uncovering what that is and what that's like. Spent the first 25 years of my life really going, hey, I'm just going to survive and make sure you can't get me. I've spent the last 15 years going, if I allow myself to transition out of a space of simply disclosure, which I will define as just sharing information, into a space of vulnerability, which is the opportunity for people to see me and the opportunity for me to actually see others. The last 15 years for me has been a journey into that, both personally, professionally, in my relationships with my family, my friends, to discover and uncover what life is like if and when we allow ourselves to live vulnerably.
Wow, that is powerful, Rocky. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. There's a lot of things that popped out of there, and I often say that I don't share my story because it's unique. I share my story because it's a story of many. It's just told differently, right? So our traumas, our character defects, our shortcomings, our lack ofs, our survival skills, they're all very similar in every human being that come from some kind of trauma, some kind of stress, some kind of, in this case, your parents separating, you moving multiple times. You develop, in my opinion, what survival skills, right?
100%.
And they became what we call, I come from the recovery background, right? I've been sober 22, 23 years, the character defects and the shortcomings, right? And they get us along for a long time. They carry us on. We as young men and women, we learn to utilize the isms, for lack of a better word, to be able to get us through. There become survival skills, but at some point they turn against us. Then you talked about, you get married, and then you recover that now you discover that you're not living with another human being, and not your lives really come together, and you realize the deficiencies that you have as a man, as an individual, as a person. They're not good or bad; they just are, right? So, how did you deal with it? What was your deep dive into? Here I am, and now I realized that I've been operating in a certain way. How do I break those cycles? How do I go back and reconstruct myself?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it began by admitting that something was broken. There's a phrase I use a lot, that in order to dress your wounds, you have to address your wounds. And I think for me, it was the recognition that, wait a second, metaphorically, I'm bleeding and I can't dress this wound. I can't heal this wound until I'm willing to address the fact that there is a wound there. And so I think marriage is a really unique tool. I think many of us would agree. Marriage is a really unique tool that exposes wounds that we have, because we have somebody, most of the time unknowingly, pressing on those pain points. And we've never had somebody close enough to us to press on those before. And so I think for me, there was a very distinct moment. I remember I was going to go to counseling before we got married. I was going to be a really good husband. And so I go to counseling, I sit down, and it's maybe our second or third session. And the counselor says to me, Rocky, tell me why you want to marry your wife. Why are you so excited about marrying Sarah? And I think I honestly didn't even take a breath. I just immediately said, because I want to prove to my dad that I'm not like him, and to my mom that I'm not like her husband.
Wow.
And I stood there and I'm telling you, Peter, I was so confident. I thought I was killing counseling. I thought I'm such a good
Wow.
at counseling. And he looked at me and paused for 30 to 60 seconds and he had one tear run down his face. And I remember looking at him going, what are you crying about? And he said, Rocky, I asked you why you were excited to marry your wife and you didn't talk about your wife.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a very pivotal moment in my life that I remember going, wait a second. I have a choice now. I have a choice to take the pain in my life and either use that as a mechanism to protect myself from everyone, or I can use the pain in my life as a mechanism for what my purpose will be for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And I think all of us are poised with that question, hopefully many times in our life, but at least one distinct moment where I think now, if you're listening, I would ask yourself that question. Are you currently utilizing your pain, your past, your trauma, your experiences? Are you using that as a mechanism to protect yourself so the world can't get you? Or are you using that as a mechanism and an advancement for your purpose? Because that may, in fact, be the greatest strengths you have to offer the rest of the world.
Oh, that's an incredible definition. But how do we know that? How do we come to that conclusion, Rocky?
Well, I think in order to come to that conclusion, you have to be willing to say, one, am I bleeding? And two, am I going to do the work to make it right? Am I going to allow myself to be healed? I mean, after that decision, it wasn't just like, oh, you know what? I do want to love my wife. That's a great way to be married. I had to spend the last 13 years working on my marriage saying, wait a second, you know what? Before I go to counseling for my marriage, I think I should go to counseling for myself. I think I have to be able to admit that I'm not a weakling for going to get help from somebody that is much more equipped to help me understand where I came from. You know, you mentioned your history and recovery. If we think about the 12 steps, no addict on day one goes, I can't wait to work the big book and really get through the 12 steps. Absolutely. No addict says that on day one. There's an admittance. I'm fairly certain, please correct me if I'm wrong, but like that step one is to admit there is a problem.
Yeah, that you're powerless over your addiction, whatever that may be, right?
And so I think for all of us, if we use that as a really great structure or overlay to our life, I think we have to be willing to say right now, let's say if you're 22 or 32 or you're 62, regardless of your age, you have to come to a place to say, I am powerless over the things that I cannot change. And therefore, I want to allow myself to step into a place where I'm going to, we talked about this the other day when you and I were chatting, that vulnerability is not simply the exposure of our weakness. Vulnerability, I believe, is our greatest opportunity for growth. But vulnerability in some degree is an exposure. Day one at your first meeting says, hi, my name is, I am an alcoholic, or fill in the gap of whatever that is. That's vulnerability. Many on the day before they did that would say, I would never expose myself in that way. Most on day two would say, I've never been in a greater position to grow because I've been willing to allow someone to actually see who I am. And so I think for those listening and going, I want to take my pain. I want it to be purposeful. I don't want to protect myself or be in survival mode. First, admit that there was pain. And second, admit that you need someone in your corner to walk with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The minute you surrender, you open the door to freedom. And most of us don't realize that. You know, most of us feel like we have the freedom because we choose to do whatever we want. Okay. Sometimes, a lot of times, and many a times, we're doing whatever we want because we don't know what to do. Okay. We don't have a guide. We don't have a compass. We are leading on a storm that we don't know where we're going or where we're heading to. You know, Rocky is actually one of our upcoming speakers at Latin Talks, Dallas, Texas, on September 10th, Saturday, September 10th. And he is one of the reasons I reached out to him. Our team reached out to him because he has traveled quite a bit of journey. He is a man of value. He's a man of principle. He's made a lot of shifts. He's made a lot of impact in the community. And as our audience knows, we have gone through a major shift in the Excellent the movement and in my podcast as well, where we began to share more stories of local leaders where they share the stories of local leaders. They share their answers and solutions to challenges and adversities they once faced. And we are touching topics that normally people don't talk about. I think, you know, the average interview, we talk about, hey, you know, what book are you promoting? What course are you promoting? You know, what workshop are you doing this week? And tell us a little bit about the workshop. But we want to know, how was it that you got there, that you got to, what was it that drove you? I also noticed that you spent a lot of time on the pastoral staff at Chase Oak Church. How were you driven or called into serving ministry? What was it about Rocky?
Yeah, when I was in college, it was just before my senior year of college, and they were doing a camp fair, which is where they go to colleges and they look for college kids to come in and work at their summer camp. And to be totally honest with you, I was walking through our student union building. I had my at that point we didn't have these cool headphones, so I had wired headphones and I had an iPod Nano for those of you that remember what that is. And I
Sure.
was listening to music. I had my backpack on, my head was down, and I didn't want anyone to talk to me because I thought there is no way I'm going to spend the summer at a summer camp working with a bunch of kids, not a chance. And so I'm walking through, and someone came from behind and tapped me on the shoulder. And I remember thinking, like, I don't want to talk to this person. I turned around and he said, "Hey, how you doing? You interested in working at a camp this summer?" And in my brain, everything said, "You just say no and walk away." And I went, "Yes." And he said, "That's awesome. Where do you want to work? Do you want to work at a sports camp or a Christian camp?" And I remember thinking, Rocky, bail now. If you turn around and walk out, he'll never see you again. It'll only be embarrassing for less than 30 seconds. Just walk out. And I said, I think a Christian camp. And I was not at a place in my life where I think that I was set up to be in the student union building to go work at a Christian summer camp. Nonetheless, fast forward, went through the interview process, got offered a job to go work there as a counselor. That summer, I think I experienced for the first time in my life people who loved me, cared for me, and appreciated me. And they
Wow.
talked about who I was, not just my ability to perform. And I don't know that I had been in a position prior to my life where I had experienced the amount of people and the amount of intentionality that was talking about my person and my character more than they were talking about my performance. And something in there for me triggered, something in there clicked that went, wait a second. I have spent at that point 20 years, 21 years performing, trying to be the best, proving that I was unique, proving that I was different, proving, hoping that someone would say, I see you. And I found myself in a position where people were seeing me, and I don't actually think I was doing that good of a job. And it was a really, really unique 13-week experience for me. After that, I said, you know what? If there's anything that I'm going to do after college, I want to do this. I want to go give my time and allow other people to experience what I just experienced this summer as a counselor. And so I got offered a full-time job to go back and work at Sky Ranch, which is where I started off in ministry I worked there for about 4 years. Got offered a job to come to Dallas and be at Chase Oaks Church on their pastoral staff, and really did that 7 or 8 year tenure in full-time vocational ministry. For me, it was, how do I find somebody else and help them see that there is a greater goodness and value in them intrinsically that is actually a gateway to incredible performance. But incredible performance is never going to be a gateway to love, care, and acceptance.
Wow.
And so I think that journey, while I was in it, I say now at hindsight's always 2020. I think for me, I probably was only ever like one step ahead of anybody I was ever tasked to lead or coach or train, at least during that time. They're like, "Hey, you should preach on Sunday." And I'm like, I will spend 7 days doing nothing practicing because I'm not sure if I'm ready. But I think what happened is it taught me that, hey, first of all, most people are not looking to be led by somebody who has it all figured out, because most of us are not on a path of arrival. Most of us are looking for someone in our life who has 1 or 2 steps more than we do, that is still close enough to remember the pain to take that first step, but far enough in front of us to reach out a hand if we need it. And I think for me, that time in ministry was really I would describe it as that, as I was on a journey of uncovering and discovering who I was consistently, figuring out how to share that, but only ever a step or half step ahead of those I was tasked to lead. So I had the capacity to still at that point kind of to pull them with me. I think
Wow.
that led to the ability for me to be able to say, now, you know what? Ministry is simply the ability to deeply care for people. And in order to care for someone, you have to be able to care for yourself. Because otherwise, we've all heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And people who are healing have the capacity to heal. And so I think it's for me, that 7 or 8 year period was kind of an unraveling, if you will, of that has allowed the last 10 to 15 years to kind of be a weaving of a tapestry, if you will, to be able to say, I think this is how I want my life to be represented moving forward.
Wow. 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 Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Let me ask you a question. I'm going to go back to your parents, and I'm going to go back to that moment in therapy for the first time. And when your therapist asked you about Sarah, right? And you said that you wanted to prove your mom and dad that you could do it better. Was that pain or was that anger?
Yes. If I can choose, I think anger was a symptom of the pain. I would say the pain was probably a symptom of of being naive. I think there's a phrase recently in my life, Peter, that I took this from someone else to be. This is not my phrase, but I think I lived a lot of my life ignorantly arrogant, as opposed to ignorantly humble.
Is that ignorant, arrogant? Was that a defense mechanism, a protection?
100%. I think every human being to some degree is ignorant. All of us. There's things. Ignorant just means you don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know. There's a lot of things you're going to ask me to do. I don't know. I think ignorant humility says, hey, I don't know that, and I would love for you to teach me. I think ignorant arrogance says, there's nothing I don't know, and I'm just fine. I don't need you.
Yeah.
My pain in my life caused me to live ignorantly arrogant, because where I had tried to say, will you help me? I had believed a lie that no one wanted to.
Right.
My mom didn't want to because she chose husbands. My dad didn't want to because he chose a different family. My friends didn't want to because I moved and they didn't call me back after I switched houses. I had created such a narrative, such a story, that woe was me. No one loved me. No one cared about me. And I think in part the reality is that I was living in a place of arrogance, then led to a place, to your point, a place of pain, which then led to anger, which then led to some level of resentment. And honestly, if I could close the gap, I think probably in myself personally led to some level of shame.
Wow.
I think, and shame says you inherently are bad, right? Like guilt is you did something bad. Okay, I'm guilty. But shame says you didn't just do something bad, you are bad. And I think for a long time, that loop circled back around to shame. And I walked in a lot of shame early in my life that said, Rocky, you are bad. You're not valuable. So you better perform to make up for the fact that you're not good.
And Rocky, to your point right there, I want to talk a little bit more about that circle, because in most cases, that circle doesn't get broken. It doesn't end there. It perpetuates. The victim becomes a perpetrator. Okay. The victim becomes a participant. The victim becomes a victimizer. Okay. Or the victim can become the villain, or the victim can become the victor. Okay. And the advocate, and breaks the cycle. And you're no longer repeating the cycles of dysfunction that perpetuate in many of families, right? Had you not looked for help, had you not had that tap on the shoulder walking on campus, had you not been exposed to a different environment that was loving, caring, compassionate, and caring, that gave you a moment to pause, okay, you may have been the guy that got married 5 times and got divorced and started 2 or 3 multiple families, right? So I think that a lot of times we need to listen to the whispers, okay, that are tapping us, that are whispering to us, that are calling upon us. And a lot of times we ignore, or many of us ignore, in a rush to try to get away from ourselves when we think that we're getting away from someone else, right? So
I could not agree more.
So tell us a little bit more about, where are you at with your parents today, and how have you been able to reconcile? Because I think it's important. You know, a lot of times we hear about the pain. You know, I used to talk, I'm one of 13 children, okay? My mom had a 6th grade education. My dad had a 3rd grade education that was from sexual abuse to pedophilia to poverty in my home. I mean, there was a lot of dysfunction. I used to talk about that. And a lot of times when people used to hear me share that story, they either wanted to feel sorry for me, or they were angry at me, in the case of many of my family members, that I was talking about, I was bringing the families, I was exposing the family's laundry, okay? What I was trying to do by sharing my story is to validate the stories of others, to give others permission to share their stories. So where are you with your parents today, and how was it that you were able to reconcile that relationship and accept that your parents could only give you what they had? It's not that they're bad people, they're just what they had.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could take everything you just said and we'll run it in reverse. It started with an acknowledgement to go, my parents do love me, and my parents did give me everything that they had at their disposal, doing the very best they could. That will never not be true. It's the same. It's true right now for me and my kids. I'm doing I had a friend tell me, and this relates to what you're saying. He said, Rocky, do you think you're a generational breaker? This is what you're talking about, Peter. How do we break this cycle? How do we not? I said, well, I was trying to be a little bit humble, but I was like, I think so. And he said, I want to remind you of something, because I think you're going to forget this, Rocky. I said, well, give it to me. And he said, When you are a generational breaker, you are absolutely making it up as you go, but you are never faking it. And for me, there was a lot of freedom in that statement because it gave me a freedom to go, I've never done this. I've never done it. I've never seen it done. I'm doing it for the very first time. I am literally making it up as I go. Every day as a parent, I'm just trying something new. And that doesn't mean I'm faking it. And it doesn't mean I'm attempting to be something I'm not. It means every day I'm willing to be the person I am becoming. And that was a significant shift for me when I think about how to break that. Full circle back into my parents. It took me going, one, my parents love me. I know they did the best for me. It took me taking a step back going, how did they express love to me? Well, my mom worked 14 hours a day. That's how she expressed love to me. She was unwilling for me not to be taken care of in the best way that she knew how. My dad has worked 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for as long as I have known him. He started a business the year I was born. He has the same business. He's 66 years old now, still gets up and works 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, because looking back at his life, that's the only way that he knew to show that he loved you, was to make sure that you had everything that you needed, because he grew up not having what he needed, and he never wanted anyone in his life to feel or experience that. And so I think it took a recognition of myself to go, wait a second, my parents love me. My dad now, I talk to my dad often. We have a great relationship. When I was in college, I called him one day and said, hey, what are you doing this weekend? He said, I'm not sure. And I said, well, you've never been to where I've been to school. I'd love you to come and see me. Fully ready for him to say, oh, I'm sorry, son, I'm working. He said, all right, I'll leave in the morning. I'll head that way. And I remember hanging up thinking like, no, you're not supposed to come. You're supposed to say I can't. And then I could prove myself right. Like I knew I was right. And he came, we had a great weekend. I remember sitting down with my father. I can see the apartment. I can see where we were and what it was like. And I looked across at my dad, obviously, and full of tears. And I said, Dad, I love you and I care about you. And I recognize that things have not gone the way either one of us probably had planned. But I do believe there is a plan for my life. And I do not want to walk down that path and turn around and you not be there because I didn't invite you. Wow. I'm not asking you to be my father. I'm not asking you to call me every day and be my dad. I just want you to be my friend. And I want you to be in my life. And from that day forward, that was in 2004. That was 18 years ago. And over the course of the last 18 years or so, we've worked and we've reconciled and we see each other and he sees my kids and we spend time together. And so has it been a long, arduous, difficult, a lot of work in the last 18 years? Yes. Anybody who said it's not, I don't think has really experienced it. But would I do it all over again? 100%. And the same is true with my mom. She comes and sees our kids once a week. Well, my wife and I can go on a date night every Tuesday, and we've had lots of really good, hard conversations, and we've talked deeply about what she does and what I do and how we do it, and we now talk often. And it all began with a reconciliation, I think, in my own self to say, to your point, they did the very best that they could.
Absolutely.
It's now my duty, though, to do the very best that I can in full recognition of where I am at, where my pain is, where I want to find or a reconciliation or healing. And then what is going to be the impact that I am making in my own life? I used to say all the time, what do you want to do? And what do you want to accomplish in life? It's a question I ask people all the time in coaching and in workshops. What's one thing in life you want to accomplish? And I used to have this really eloquent answer. I want to leave a legacy of curiosity, care, and challenge for I don't know, some BS. Sure. And I remember a mentor of mine, he said, Rocky, I think your answer is very beautiful. He said, but do you want to simply leave a legacy of all those wonderful, articulate things, or do you want to build and live that legacy before you leave?
Wow.
And that has changed the course of, I think, how I live my life on a daily basis from that phrase, because it has forced me to think presently about my actions, not simply the results of what will happen when I'm gone.
And what does that mean? What are your actions different since that moment that was brought up to your attention? How do you live out your legacy on a daily basis? And I'm asking this question for the audience.
Yeah. So I think number one is I want to be cognizant of how I spend every moment of my time. So as opposed to going, I'll just do this and I'll think about it tomorrow because it won't matter for 15 years. 15 years won't matter unless I think about today. And so for me, time is the only resource we have that we will never get more of. You can't create more of it. You have what you have, right? And so for me, to get really practical, I have a journal that I use. I write down, I have what I call the daily 5. It's the 5 things I do every single day, 7 days a week, as soon as I get up, to make sure that I have set myself on a trajectory to have a great day. I have 10 goals. I write down my goals every single day, 7 days a week. I look at my calendar and say, how am I spending my time? And is that where I want to be? And are those the people I want to be with? Every single day. I think thinking about our daily habits, our daily actions, and what we do regularly are setting the precedent, to your point, of how do you build and live the things you want to create? If I can't do it now, it's not going to happen later. Now, the amount of corn that's in the storehouse, right? The amount of things we're able to keep and store away and have, that obviously takes time. You got to let the fruit grow on the vine. You can't just plant a plant and expect to have harvest tomorrow. But every day, you got to make sure that you're thinking about the plant. You got to make sure you're thinking about the garden. And so for me, the word I would use would be, what question I ask myself is, what am I cultivating daily? Did I ask my wife how she was doing? When we go on date nights, it's not a fun question, but I ask my wife every other week, hey, if you could rate the way that I have loved and cared for you in a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate me? And I have to just sit with the
You froze for a second, but stay with me. You're still frozen, Rocky, but stay with me. Go ahead. Your wife rates you on
So my wife rates me on a scale of 1 to 10 in regards to what she says. I can't defend it. I can't tell you she's right or wrong. I just listen and nod and go, I think you're right. That's building and living actively what I hope is said about me later on. And if I'm not doing it now, and so to make it really simple, if you're listening and you're out there, you're going, what can I do today to think about it? The most simple and difficult question I could challenge you to ask. I ask every person I meet, what do you want? Make a list of what do you want? Well, I want to have $1 million. Awesome. What do you want when you have $1 million? What do you actually want? Because you said early on, I meant to bring this up, but we were on a roll, so I didn't want to stop us. If we don't have a direction, I think you said if we don't have a direction or a compass or to know where we're headed.
Yeah.
So, you got to know what you want. You got to know where you're going. Otherwise, the compass is irrelevant.
Yes.
Everybody can have a map, but if you don't have a destination that you want to at least head towards, it's not the final thing. Goals are not the monument, right? Goals are not the destination. Goals are just a mile marker to say, man, look at that point in my life. Incredible. Let's keep going.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's for us, it's the ability to think about, if we're not just going to leave something awesome, we're going to build it and we're going to live it. Start by saying, what do I want? Secondly, what is the daily habits and actions required for me to move towards that thing in which I want? 3, I would say the most important, what accountability do you have in your life to keep you on track in that direction? Accountability being defined as simply a reminder of what you want.
Love it. Rocky, you said a minute ago that in order to not repeat the cycle, okay, you have to live and make it as you go along. You go through life, you make it as you go along. How do you become aware whether you're repeating a cycle or not? Or what has been the most prevalent to you in your case? Maybe as an adult man, as a husband, and maybe also as a father. What was the one particular incident that said, whoa, I'm retrieving, I'm going back, I need to do better? Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me, it's the way that I feel when I get frustrated. It's I find myself surprisingly enough, I had this conversation last night, Peter. It's when I think about I'll use parenting as an example. When there is conflict with my kids, I know that I am moving in a direction of health when I don't create conflict because they didn't do what I asked, and I didn't create conflict when they didn't do what I asked my way. I recognize I am retreating to my old ways when I find myself in conflict with my kids because I said, Ezra, can you put your shoes in your closet? Sure, Dad. And he goes to his closet and he gets a dump truck and he brings the dump truck back in. He puts one shoe in a dump truck and pushes the dump truck to the closet and he dumps his shoe out. Then he comes back in that moment, there's always a moment that I have to ask myself, am I about to freak out and just yell and tell him to pick up the shoe and take it to his room? Or is he, in fact, picking up the shoes and taking them to his room? Yeah. He's just doing it his way.
Right.
And I think with parenting, I think with marriage, I think with friends in business, is the conflict because they didn't do what I asked, or is the conflict because they didn't do what I asked my way? And I
Wow.
think there's an element of that for me. That's kind of my initial litmus test to go. And you can paint that on the way I develop relationships. You can paint that on the way I run a business. You can put that anywhere. Where conflict exists, if it is simply because of my own preference, I have experienced living someone's preferential life, and it wasn't an environment of care and love and curiosity that you described. But where I lived a life of care and curiosity, as you described, conflict seems to be lower because I'm willing to allow someone the space to become who they are. When
Wow.
I want to control that, it doesn't go well, and I find myself slipping back into those places. When
Wow.
I lead with care and curiosity and encouragement, it's amazing how much conflict subsides because I'm not creating it for the purpose to prove that I can be in control.
Wow. 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 Rocky, you've spoken to over 50,000 people in the last 10 years. You have coached over 1,000 individuals in the last 15, and you have led 100 full-day team events in the last 6 years. Let's talk about your workshops. Talked about identity mapping. What is this identity mapping? Why is it important? How do we get there?
Absolutely. So I think identity mapping is important because I believe many of us, if not all of us, have a good, deep understanding of who we are. Where I feel like the breakdown happens, at least it happened in my life and those that I've worked with, is it's not that we don't know who we are, it's that we lack the language to bring who we are to life. Everybody has a set of enduring values. We could call them convictions, beliefs, core values. Everybody has a set of those that you operate with. Until you identify what those are, define them for yourself, and then let them be practical and applicable to your daily decisions, we would all say we're just making decisions because we like it. We felt that. It was in our gut. It's our instinct. Well, it's really hard for me to interact with Peter on Peter's instinct if I have no idea what Peter's instinct is other than he likes it or he doesn't like it. There's no room for connection or depth or intimacy. If I then, in fact, know what Peter's convictions, beliefs are, he has defined them for me. And I recognize that authenticity and excellence and achievement are things that he values. Now, all of a sudden, I have a better understanding of who he is in my interactions. And he has a better understanding of who he is when he enters the world. Identity mapping is either a half day or a full day process based on the amount of people we have that walks us through a self-assessment that allows us to understand how our brain works and how we think, what we value most, or we would call our why, what our strengths are, which are our muscles, and what we call identifiers, which are the most actionable words we have to describe how we show up every day as a human. We place all that together in what we call our identity map. We have values, strengths, and identifiers. And then I walk you through how those words speak to one another by saying, what do I do? How do I do it? And why do I do it? Following the language you, not me, have created for yourself as a better understanding of who you are. To me, that's step one, called clarity. To get anywhere in life, I believe we need clarity. Identity mapping is the clarity we need to better understand who we are. That's workshop number one.
Now, who's your ideal avatar client for that workshop?
I would say any person who's ever sat back and thought, man, who am I? A person who said, I really know, I think where I want to go, but I'm not sure how to get there. What do I really want to do? As we ask ourselves questions about our own person, our ability to, let's go to each point we've talked about so far, breaking a generational cycle, being able to address the pain in our life, making a change that we don't feel equipped to make by ourselves. Most of the time that comes because we are unclear. I would say the majority of the folks that I work with are somewhere either between the age of 25 and 35 or between the ages of 50 and 65. That tends to be the two age range that I work with most often. I think that's because it's folks coming into the workplace going, hey, I want some clarity before I really double down. And folks saying, I've been in the workplace for 20 years. I got to have a reassessment of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to spend the next 20 years. Those tend to be the two age demographics that I tend to work with most often.
Then your other workshop is Be Confident, right?
Correct.
So let's talk about Be Confident.
So Be Confident is a workshop broken down to help us understand where doubt comes from. How do we identify it? How do we put it to death and build a new truth and conviction about the goodness and who we are? I believe there's two narratives at play in people's life at all times. There's the stories that are told to us about us. That's things like, Rocky, you're too emotional, you're too intense. Anything with TOO or so, any definitive language that's been shown to us over the course of our life. That's the stories told to us about us. The second narrative is the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. That's when Rocky says, he walks into a stage and he says, Rocky, look at their face. They don't like this. You should calm down. Rocky, it's a professional setting. Don't cry. Keep it together. Those two stories are running parallel at all times. When those two stories collide, I use that word on purpose. When those two stories collide, there is an impact that is created. I believe it's either the impact of fear, doubt, obstacle, or insecurity, or it's the impact of confidence and conviction that allows us to change the narrative. When we address that, Rocky, you're too intense. And Rocky says, look at their faces, bro, calm it down. Boom, collision. I have a choice. I'm going to live in the doubt that says my intensity is bad and negative and people don't like it. Or I'm going to be again to unravel the narratives and say, I cannot control the story told to me about me. That is not mine. But what I say to myself now is, Rocky, you are intense. And it is good because it is a reality and a truth of who I am. And so it's Be Confident is a workshop where we're going to unravel those stories, identify the lie or doubt that comes from the collision of those two narratives, and find a way to rebuild a new narrative that allows us to live in truth and conviction that says, Rocky, you are emotional. You are intense. You are a man, and it is good.
Rocky, in a society as today, that we live today, where we basically have a social media persona and we have a real persona. How do we know, how do we identify which is a confident persona or which is a real persona, or do we merge both?
I mean, I'm personally coming from the camp that you have to merge both. You have to be able to say who is Rocky Garza, the human being, and I work really hard every day to be Rocky everywhere. If I'm on social posting a video, that's really me. That's really what I think. I'm just sharing who I am. When I'm at dinner with my family, that's who I am. When I'm with friends, that's who I am. When I'm on a podcast with Peter Estevez, or I'm going to be doing a workshop someplace else, I want to show up and be fully who I am, because I believe that gives me the freedom that in any of those places, I have the confidence, no pun intended, but I have the ability to be confident in everything that I'm doing and saying, because it's not a show. It's not a persona. It's not an alter ego or an alter something else. It is, in fact, who I am. Are there caveats and nuances? And there may be things I would say on a podcast that I wouldn't say on a corporate stage. Sure, possibly. But I don't think that's me being a different me. I think that's me recognizing who the audience is and how do I best connect with that person. So I'm always going to come from the camp. There is one hat to put on every day, and that's the hat of exactly who I am.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I think the reality is that you have to be exactly who you are. Yes, there may be a different stage where you may show up a little bit differently, but I think if we look at social media as an extension of who we are as a human being, another extension as a tool, we don't have to fake it till we make it. We just are who we are. Now let's talk about the last workshop, which is Be Known. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Be Known is a workshop we walk through understanding how to effectively and practically build meaningful relationships. I think in my life, I've looked at anything that has good that has happened because of a relationship with somebody else somewhere. Very little, if anything, do I look at and go, that was amazing, and I did it all by myself. So if that's the case, how do we build meaningful relationships? Be clear, understanding ourselves. Be confident, the ability to look at something and believe that it's good. That's confidence. Be known, how do I take that into the world and build meaningful relationships that allow me to better know myself and understand others? So we've got a relationship map that we walk folks through. We go, who is the relationship? Who's the person? What kind of relationship is it? You identify that. What is the marker for success in this relationship? And so we have people identify, how would you want this relationship to be described? Then we say, what are the potential barriers that are going to keep that from happening in this relationship? Let's go ahead and do a little bit of foresight and say, what is that? What are going to be my markers for success that allow me to say, this is, in fact, I know the relationship is going and growing the way that I want it to be. And then who is the accountability in my life going to be to help me foster and grow relationships in this way? I believe most of the time relationships that suffer are not because either party is bad. It's because we lack the tools to understand how to effectively build meaningful relationships, because most of us, let's go back to the first 3 minutes of our podcast, live in pain, we live in trauma, we live in survival, and we don't know how to effectively build a meaningful relationship because we've been protecting ourselves and keeping ourselves safe the majority of our life. This is a practical tool that allows us to go, if I really want to be known, how do I show up? It came because I was 36 years old, having tacos and margaritas with a good friend of mine. We were about to leave, and I said, hey, I got one more thing I need to share with you before you leave. And he was like, yeah, what's up? And of course, me, because I cry about everything, I started crying. He's like, hey, are you okay? And I said, hey, this is going to sound weird, but I just want to know, do you want to be my best friend?
Wow.
And he looked at me and he's with tears in his eyes. He said, I would love that. And that came from a be known relationship mapping, going, you know what? Sometimes even as a 36, 37-year-old dude, you got to sit across from one of your friends with margaritas and go, hey, do you want to be my best friend? Because the only way he's ever going to know that I want to be friends is if I say I want to be friends.
Wow. Wow. That's a powerful story. And I hope that our listenership grabs to that, because that's important. It, that is so important, to be able to dig so deep into yourself and to know who you are and to become vulnerable and to let go from that. It is how you find your freedom. You're going to hear more about Rocky Garza at not only here on the podcast, on our social media, and of course, you are able to see him in person on Saturday, September 17 at in Dallas, Texas at Latin Talk. So, Rocky, thank you so much. In closing, how would you like to close? What would you like to take the audience? What is your takeaway from this conversation?
Yeah. Well, one, thank you, Peter. I so appreciate being able to be on the podcast. For those of you listening, I just want to remind you of this. Spend 60 seconds today. I want you to find a place where there is a mirror that you can see yourself in. I want you to go find a mirror and I want you to stand across. I just want you to look at yourself for 60 seconds. Don't lose eye contact. Don't look away. Don't be on your phone. Just make eye contact with yourself for 60 seconds straight. And then when you are done, I want you to be reminded that you, exactly how you are right now, that you are good.
Wow.
What you do and how you perform will not change the inherent value and worth that you carry. When you can fully believe your worth and your value, how you show up will absolutely change every single day.
Remember, you are good. Rocky Garza, thank you so much.